Hello class, I'm Megan Luong and my group members are Nyan Kim, Cesar Martinez, and Kwa Tran. Our group is called Big Brothers and Sisters, alluding to the novel 1984 by George Orwell. Our presentation is about privacy versus the government. So, what is privacy? Privacy's meaning can vary greatly among different people, and how much it means to them can vary as well. Some people deeply value privacy, exposing as little information about themselves as they can, while some others value privacy less, as they publicize many aspects of their lives through social media. Many others lie in between. According to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the definition of privacy is the quality or state of being apart from company or observation, or freedom from unauthorized intrusion. Now, how does technology affect privacy? With the internet, people are able to share information more rapidly than ever, and allowing people to connect and share more about themselves as well, often using social media. This technology propels significant growth and innovation, but also allows for crime to become more advanced as they make their way online. In order to combat this, governments use surveillance online, and this surveillance has become better and better. Also, with the amount of information the government might be able to access on the people through their internet, history, and social media, what they know about us greatly increases, ultimately decreasing privacy. Privacy versus protection. This is a frequently discussed topic. The trade-off between privacy and protection is a dilemma many face, especially when discussing internet crime and safety. Internet crime can be almost completely stopped if the government and law enforcement had surveillance watching everywhere, but that would completely sacrifice privacy as all actions would be monitored. However, completely neglecting crime on the internet for the sake of privacy is obviously not an option. Giving up some privacy for protection can be incredibly good, such as in the case of tracking people with COVID-19, which will be discussed later. But why should we care about privacy then? Well, privacy is important for protecting our human rights. Why should we care about privacy? The main reason why we should care about privacy is that privacy protects our other fundamental rights. Privacy also humanizes us to companies and the government. Privacy is important because it protects us from the misuse of personal information. People can be harmed by the revelation of sensitive personal information such as medical records, psychological tests, court records, and financial records. For example, if the police force had access to all of our genetic information and such was not kept private, and found that a family member had been convicted of a crime before, this person would be more likely to be profiled as a suspect and maybe even harassed by the law and wrongly convicted for a crime. Such information, like genetic information in this example, can be used against us. Privacy protects us from this. Privacy protection is needed to safeguard us from abuses such as discrimination and even blackmail and extortion. Privacy is needed for ordinary human interaction and relationships. Privacy is essential for forming relationships, as the degree of intimacy in a relationship is determined in part by how much personal information is revealed. What a person discloses to a friend is different from what they disclose to their employer. And what you discuss with a healthcare professional is usually very private information. What people discuss with their doctors and therapists are usually things that they would not want everyone to know, especially sensitive information about mental health. The special relationship between patient and healthcare professional requires a great amount of openness and trust that is only possible if this interaction is kept private. Hence the laws protecting patient confidentiality. Would you be open with your therapist if you knew that the information you revealed would put you in jeopardy, such as being on a government watch list? The government law enforcement can access your medical records if it is relevant to their investigation, but otherwise should not be able to see your information and actively discriminate against you. What is autonomy and how does privacy affect it? Autonomy is free will. Privacy affects our free will. As Deborah Johnson said, to recognize an individual as an autonomous being, an end in himself, entails letting that individual live his life as he chooses. Of course, there are limits to this, but one of the critical ways that an individual controls his life by choosing with whom he will have relationships and what kind of relationships these will be. Information mediates relationships. Thus, when one cannot control who has information about one loses considerable autonomy. This means when we lose control of our personal information, what we reveal about ourselves, we lose control of what and who we are. What a person shares and chooses not to share about themselves shows what kind of person they are. If the government is able to manipulate information we see about people and current events, they get to influence and ultimately choose our relationships, what we believe in, and what we stand for. And this means we lose who we are. Autonomy is a broader issue of human dignity. Human dignity is at stake if privacy is compromised, especially in the digital age. People's information, and therefore people, are treated as a commodity, being sold, bought, and used. This is particularly worrying when personal information is distributed and sold without consent, and sometimes without people's knowledge. Treating people as a commodity is dehumanizing. People are grouped and categorized, which can lead to more discrimination. Privacy is correlated to power. With great protection of privacy, people can choose how they present themselves, choose the media they consume, and ultimately form independent thought. People with privacy have power over themselves. Privacy protects the freedom and the relationships between individuals and groups. When people know that their actions and dispositions are constantly observed, commented on, and criticized, they find it harder to do anything that is different from the norm or socially acceptable behavior. Under these circumstances, they find it better to simply conform. This situation is shown in George Orwell's 1984, where the pervasive surveillance of Big Brother was enough to keep most citizens under rigid control. When governments forego privacy, they can manipulate, censor, and control the masses. The Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution protects privacy of American citizens. It states, "The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath." This protects the people from the government invading their privacy in person. But how are we protected online? There are laws that protect your privacy online. So we are indeed protected online. Here are the laws that protect your privacy online from companies and the government. The Federal Trade and Commission Act of 1914 regulates unfair or deceptive commercial practices. The FTC is the primary federal regulator in the privacy area and brings enforcement actions against companies that fail to adequately protect personal information. The Electronic Communications Privacy Act of 1986 protects wire, oral, and electronic communications from unauthorized interception, access, use, and disclosure. The Computer Fraud and Abuse Act of 1986 makes unlawful, uncertain computer-related activities involving the unauthorized access of a computer to obtain certain information, defraud, or obtain anything of value, transmit harmful items, or traffic in computer passwords. The Children's Online Privacy Protection Act of 1998 requires certain websites and online service providers to obtain verifiable parental consent before collecting, using, or disclosing personal information from minors under the age of 13. Controlling the Assault of Non-Solicited Pornography and Marketing Act of 2003 governs sending unsolicited commercial emails and prohibits misleading header information and deceptive subject lines. It also requires senders to disclose certain information, including a valid opt-out mechanism, and it creates civil and criminal penalties for violations. So, what do Americans think about their privacy from the government? According to the Pew Research Center, about 6 in 10 Americans believe it is not possible to go throughout their day while having their data collected by companies and the government. A majority of Americans feel as if they do not have much control over the data collected about them by companies and the government. Almost 70% of Americans believe that the potential risk of data collection from the government outweighs the benefits. 64% of Americans are concerned about how their data is being used by the government, and 78% of Americans believe that they have little understanding of what their government does with their data. This shows that Americans feel that their privacy does not matter to the government and feels lack of privacy from the government. This also shows lack of transparency within the government to the American people regarding their data collection.
Hi, I'm Nayoung Kim, and I'm going to talk about the continuous fight between our privacy rights versus government protection using technology that's been happening for a century now. First, we'll look at the cases in the US history that became the precedent of how Supreme Court interpret government's use of technology as a legal or an illegal surveillance tool. First case we'll look at is the Olmstead versus US case, which happened in 1928. It was a prohibition time, and when Roy Olmsted was a suspected bootlegger. The Supreme Court convicted that the police's evidence found by wiretap without judicial approval wasn't violating the Constitution. It was because the Supreme Court interpreted the Fourth Amendment to apply only to physical intrusion and only to the search of seizure of material things, not conversation. Second case is Katz versus US case in 1967. Suspecting Katz was transmitting gambling information through phone call. Police wiretapped the public phone booth used by Katz. He was convicted guilty in the lower court, but he made appeal to disagreeing on the result, which then his case was taken to the higher court. This time, Supreme Court reversed its position by interpreting the Fourth Amendment differently than the previous case. The Fourth Amendment protects people, not places, meaning that to intrude in a place where reasonable person has reasonable expectation of privacy requires court order. The next case is the 2001 Kylo versus United States. Supreme Court ruled that the police could not use the thermal imaging devices to search a home from the outside without a search warrant. Court stated that when government uses a device that is not in general public use to explore details of the home that would previously have been unknowledgeable without physical intrusion, the surveillance is a search. In 90s in US, before 9/11 happened, the Congress had mainly focused on the legislation to prevent international terrorism. But after the April 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, which was by the American citizen, the domestic terrorism gained more attention. On April 24th of 1996, Bill Clinton signed the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996 to make it easier for law enforcement to identify and prosecute domestic and international terrorists. This law, however, was refused by the congressmen because many of them thought loosening surveillance and record rules was unconstitutional. 9/11 attack happened in 2001, which shocked the world and the US citizens. This terror attack increased the US citizens' attention on international terrorism and to create a strong defense system. Congress accepted the US Attorney General Ashcroft's post 9/11 recommendation to increase the surveillance to protect the country, which is called Patriot Act. The full name of this act is Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism. It was passed in 45 days after 9/11. And it was designed to expand the powers of the government to surveil and investigate and detain suspected terrorists. The Patriot Act allowed the law enforcement to use surveillance and wiretapping to investigate terror-related crimes. Federal agents to request court permission to use roving wiretap to track a specific terrorist suspect, and delayed notification search warrant to prevent a terrorist from learning they are a suspect. Also, federal agent to seek federal court permission to obtain bank records and business records to aid international security terror investigation and prevent money laundering from terrorism financing. Improving information and intelligence sharing between government agencies were also allowed. It was too much power given to the government, which made them to invade individual privacy, which was unconstitutional. However, looking at the data on the right side, you can see that the National Security Letter, NSL, are issued by FBI agent without a judge's approval to obtain personal information, and the NSL includes phone records, computer records, credit history, and bank history. Between 2003 to 2006, the FBI issued around 192 NSLs, but only one case was convicted as a terror-related. The abuse of privacy through Patriotic Act. You can see that on the left side it says, even if the information is determined to concern innocent Americans, It doesn't require the information to be destroyed, so it can be stayed or saved forever. Also, the Patriotic Act prohibits Americans who receive NSLs from telling anyone. These gag order provisions have been held unconstitutional in several legal cases. Also, sneak peek searches are also allowed through the Patriotic Act. This allows federal law enforcement agencies to not give notice or delay the notice when they conduct secret searches of American homes and of offices. And of this 3,970 sneak peeks in 2010, 76% was drug-related, 21% was other, and then less than 1% was terror-related, even though this act was made to prevent the terror attack. The strong surveillance continued with the U.S. Patriotic and Terrorism Reauthorization Act at 2006 by President Bush. Many of the Patriotic Act was gonna expire in 2005, even though there was continuous civil liberties and privacy concern raised by the organizations. This law remained, which resulted in giving the government authorization to gather massive amount of data and allowed government agencies to build massive surveillance system. The massive surveillance system means an intricate surveillance of an entire or substantial fraction of a population in order to monitor that group of citizens. The mass surveillance, it's not just happening in US, but it happens globally. It's cited that it's necessary to fight terrorism, prevent crime, and to fight social unrest or protect national security, and also control the population. However, it is criticized for violating privacy rights and limiting civil and political rights, and also freedom, and by being illegal under some legal or constitutional system. This could lead to a development of a surveillance state or an electronic police state where civil liberties are infringed or political dissent is undermined by the computerized program, and eventually create totalitarian state. This mass surveillance system was hidden by the government, but it was Edward Snowden who disclosed this practice of a national security agency of the US to the public. The practice of the mass surveillance by governments all over the world was called into a question. 12 years after the Patriotic Act, it triggered a debate about civil liberties and the right to privacy in a digital age. The USA Freedom Act in 2015 was signed by President Obama. It was to help prevent the Patriotic Act from infringing on American civil liberties. This act ended the bulk collection of all records under Section 215 of the Patriotic Act. This act allowed the citizens were now allowed to challenge the National Security Letter, NSL, gag orders. This act forced the government agencies to be more transparent and to share more information between U.S. foreign intelligence, surveillance court, and the American people. It was the withdrawal from the government which gave more transparency and to less invade individual privacy. Even though there are transparency from the government to the people, government still collects metadata through telecom providers. Seeing the diagram on the left says domestic internet backbone surveillance. The US government contained metadata made through the 4 largest telecom companies in US, which now became just AT&T and Verizon. This database, maintained by NSA, which is also called Mainway, its existence was unknown to the general public until USA Today broke the story in 2006. It estimates that there are 1.9 trillion call detail records, such as caller, retriever, date and time of call, or length of the call, etc. NSA says that it's for the traffic analysis and social network analysis purpose, and then the data does not include audio information or transcripts of the content of the phone calls. However, just intercepting the information and searching for the information that they want is already unconstitutional. And there are high chances that the information can get abused when it's in the wrong person's hand, since it's already accessible.
Thank you, my group mates, for fervently defending the importance of personal freedom and the virtue of privacy. Now, the Western civilization and the Western governments held themselves as bastion of freedom, with former President Ronald Reagan used to say that America was the bastion of freedom. Now, right now, everyone knows that's hardly the fact, because what uncovers from Snowden cases and the Patriot Acts afterwards demonstrated how America became the largest surveillance countries in the world. But we are not talking about that today. We are talking about COVID-19 tracking apps, because we are living in a special time. COVID-19 is a disaster. And in times of a disaster, the little people, the citizens like us, look up to their governments and asking what are they gonna do to help us, to save us, because that's what governments do. They help us and they protect their constituents in times of crisis. Now, what is interesting about COVID apps or COVID tracking apps is that we can see the position of the government in dealing with the coronavirus, what they expect from the developers, what they ask the developers, the specifics for their apps, and the attitude of the people regarding to personal freedom. And let's start all this discussion, and when we will also give you some little background about COVID-19 tracking apps technology, because this is also equally fascinating. The technology required to run the apps are also fascinating. Let's begin with an example from Asia, from China, the origin of the COVID-19 virus. Our group has the name of big brothers and sisters like the George Orwell 1984. But the Chinese surveillance system is much more advanced and far more rich than the Big Brother's one, making even Big Brother's mouth water. In the slides that you're seeing, there's a man scanning his phone in front of a board, two screenshots from two websites of Chinese. You can see also like a huge lines of people with 3 people wearing hazmat and a construction site. Now, the first picture I will say is the man putting his phone in front of a board. It's a scam because he has health declared. Because like every Chinese citizens have to declare their health conditions on specific Chinese apps, which are written by the Chinese government. Now everyone has to declare their apps. That's why the government treated people like if you are in a safe area, your barcode will be green. That's why you see a green phone on your left. That means that you're good, you can go. And in that picture, that man is probably planning to go on a bus station. The second picture are from two apps, the two most popular apps in China, Weibo and Taobao, basically Google and Facebook of China, and they pumps out Chinese correction newslet, which is basically the propaganda channel of Chinese government. They funnel the information that they want the citizens to read and to process through popular apps of China. And people will read that because the Chinese government wants to make sure people can read, or maybe most of people will read in the same narrative. That makes it easier to contain misinformation. The third picture I want to demonstrate to you all is a line of a lot of people wearing masks and 3 people wearing hazmat suits. Unlike the Western world, the Eastern world very value their nationalism and collectivism. This will be further amplified in the next slides, but keep that in mind. Asian countries have a strong sense of nationalism and collectivism. Finally, the final picture you see is a construction site. It is actually the 1,000-bed hospital built in Wuhan. The most important thing about that hospital though was that like the whole process was live streaming on the most popular streaming site in China, and there were millions of people watching it and comments on that. That is how crazy technology are. China demonstrate the craziest sides of technology, and we will explore more about that in the following slides. Now, let's go to Vietnam. Let's start with COVID-19 tracking apps from Vietnam. When you use our COVID-19 tracking apps, the Vietnamese COVID-19 tracking apps, they will ask you to have like Vietnamese phone numbers. They must ask you to have Vietnamese phone numbers because, well, simple enough. The Vietnamese government doesn't allow anybody, any foreigners or have foreign passport to enter in. So you must have a Vietnamese phone number. Now, what's interesting about the Vietnamese phone numbers is that the Vietnamese phone numbers connects to your social identity card, which is basically like they have like all your information, your basic information already. So they can have more database of you. No need to ask more. Location. Why do I put that on slides? Because they only need to make sure they know where you go. If you are a sick person, they will track the hell down of you. They track you in everywhere you go. Maybe they will not publish your name explicitly. They will not say that you are Roger Goodell, you are Tom Hanks, you have the COVID-19 virus. Well, if you're famous, maybe they will publish it. But they will just say you are the patient number X, you have come to this place, And now, please, anyone, if you are in that place, please just go testing. Now, how far do you want your government to track you? This is how far the Vietnamese government track you. You see on the picture, because I believe pictures speak more than words. This is an urgent notification on March 26. We have a whole list of the people who were infected, this timeline. And if you were in this timeline, please come to the nearest testing site. We want to make sure that anyone who are in this specific towns, please just go to the nearest health center to have the health declaration. This further demonstrates one point that my group wants to make. Apps merely are tools to further establish the surveillance system. Technology serves the purpose of the users. It is not something new. It only serves the users. It's not the intelligence one. We are not building that intelligence one yet. And to make apps become usable, the majority of people, the citizens, the users, have to accept the method that our government, the Vietnamese government in particular, they were strong-hand, authoritarian, straight down to earth, scorched earth, find every last one of them losing freedom if you have to track people down to destroy this virus as soon as possible. If people do not collaborate with the government, this whole thing will fail. Nationalism determines the function of the app. Yes, of course, the Vietnamese people willingly lose some freedom, some convenience, but if the virus is gone, they're happy to do so. This mindset will be evidently shown in Asian apps. They are not sophisticated in technology-wise because they just record your position using GPS, Wi-Fi, phone numbers, very simple tracking technology, high accuracy. They take your information, they publish it, and they get the people, they round up people. Now let's go to Europe. Yes, let's go to Europe. The place that very values personal freedom, democracy, and even in hard times like COVID-19, they still believe in democracy. Hooray! Let's change the topic to some democratic stuff. And how do they take care of this virus? Well, our European friends, as we found out in our research, do care about the doctor's advice of tracking sick people. The thing is, they want to do it in a democratic way, in a less privacy violated way, and they come to Google and Apple. Some of them, the Google one has, I think, that has tracked people a lot, but that's not the point. Now, Google and Apple collaborated to create a protocol called Pan-European Privacy Preserving Proximity Tracing (PEPP-PT), which is a full-stack open protocol designed to facilitate digital contact tracing of infected participants. Now, what that means is they are going to use Bluetooth to track the sick people. Here is how it works. You have a phone, a device has Bluetooth signal. That Bluetooth signal will generate a random number. This random number will then get mixed to other random numbers, and if you get sick, that number will be slightly adjusted, and it will notice other Bluetooth devices that there is a sick person in their premise. The good thing about this technology is because of Bluetooth emits an anonymous signal, an anonymous random number, so no one knows who actually got sick, but it still gives you the general idea that you maybe have entered a sick area and you should get tested. Well, the downside is fairly obvious. You don't know where, you don't know when, and it's not completely private either. You can deduce who actually got the virus already. But it is on is probably the best way possible to track people and still retain some personal information. Now, Europe has a different approach. According to Asian countries, they actually do collaborate with each other to make a protocol, which is basically a way to create apps, but they make apps differently. So they use the same protocol, but they use different apps. They will collect the information together and they just analyze the information together. It's as a European Union. The apps of the European is fairly straightforward too. Open the YouTube app. They will have like a map with like red zones for dangerous area. Be careful when you are there. They will get a notification to you when you are sick. And that's pretty much it. People just look at their phones. If they see it's red, it's signaling red, means that you are in dangerous area. Go get tested, and that is voila. However, nobody knows how accurate it is, but at least they can still retain some democracy trait of a European civilization. So good kudos. Now let's go to America. Yeah! Quick pop quiz. How many tracking apps can you name? Just name one noticeable tracking apps that is retaining in America. And the answer is no. There are no tracking apps that is functioning in America. Now there are many tracking apps if you go on looking on Wikipedia in America section, but if there are so few people even record on that apps, there's no way you can have the accurate picture result. Now, back in the times, President Donald Trump has announced that Apple has created an app, a COVID-19 app, back in February or even early March. Well, that was fascinating until I personally checked it out, and it was basically a questionnaire. Determine whether or not your demographic is, how old, your background, and just your precondition. And that's not helping at all because that literally did not do the work of tracking COVID-19 potential patients like the recommendations from the CDC or the epidemiologists, the people who study the disease. They want people to get tracked, but no hope. So that's why America is in hot water because they don't have a centralized tracking apps. They don't even bother with that idea. And that is why I'm going to talk very explicitly about America in my final part. Please look at the slide. This is a picture on the left is from the Minnesota riots, race riots, to consolidate with Black Lives Matter of Mr. George Floyd's murder. On your right is the Tulsa rally from President Donald Trump, probably like just days ago. And in the middle is Dr. Anthony Fauci with a mask on when he was in the press briefings. And this picture was quite long ago. Now, why I put the pictures together, I want to talk about the most important thing about technology. Technology is created, at least at this point, to serve human purpose. It is not smart enough to deduce its own path. So anyway, you create technology to do work for you. If Americans do not want an app to literally take their personal information for the greater good, for the community, they will not develop such apps. Even for testing, before the whole thing got blown up, Testing is considered for people who are in dangerous area, and very limited places were considered to be dangerous areas. There was no mass quarantine, there was no strict contact tracing, no centralized apps, because the central government of the United States government did not want that. And that's no blame for President Donald Trump, because Americans was taught to not to prioritize personal freedom. Yes, to prioritize personal freedom. The information of themselves should be kept for themselves. I find it ironic, even though like my partner just literally says that like they have to sacrifice so much for the Patriot Act, but for this COVID-19 tracing app, they don't even want to lose that freedom. I don't know why, but in these two pictures, you can see on the left, people are, well, they are rioters, they are bad people. But the left people and the right people, they don't wear masks. The doctors and the smart people, they wear masks. But the left and the right people, they don't even wear masks, even though they are in crowded places. This is the retaining problem of American society. They don't value the idea of collectivism. They value their own personal interests. This is the key mindset that is much more beyond than the GPS and the Bluetooth tracking devices. Because unlike Europe and Asia, different mindset, they do agree that if people are dying from something, it is the government's responsibility to save them. The collectivism comes again, even though like there are some separatists and some extremists go against them in Europe and also in Asia. The majority of people still retain the idea that they have to protect each other. That's why they create apps. Europe takes more time to create an app that is more comprehensive and data privacy is more matter. Asia take less time because they want to get that thing done. But overall, collectivism and nationalism comes together, bands together to promote the government, to encourage governments to do extra steps, violating normal rules to protect its own citizens in such a challenging time. Such things cannot happen in America. America relies on mass testing, but it was too late. They do not have a comprehensive tracing devices. They rely solely on the people who got sick and went to the hospital, and they test them out. And that's it. There's no quarantine of some kind. Even in Cal Poly Pomona, we don't even know who got sick. I only have like 2 emails from 2 people maybe got sick, but I don't know. I don't know who got sick. In my country, if in my country of Vietnam, if someone is got sick, they will quarantine a lot of people. We tested 14,000 people in Vietnam when a hospital got sick. America could not do that. The rally on the right, no one wore a mask. Well, lots of people don't wear a mask. The people on the left, when they were rioting in Minnesota, no one wore a mask as well. This is what we want to emphasize. It's more beyond than GPS and Bluetooth tracking device. It's more than any kind of tracking device technology. It remains in the mindset of the government. Do they actually want to go on to ask people, it is time to work together, to push this disaster, to work together, to be forward, to move away from this painful chapter? Or we just like, people just creating a herd immunity. Herd immunity means that like you have like 70% people got infected and they got better, and you do not violate personal freedom. This is a choice that America has to take, and they still persevere on their path. And I will say one last thing before this whole my part ends. You all will be smart enough to create apps with a little bit of technology background. You definitely will going to know how to create the European version of Bluetooth tracking devices, and it is very simple to create a tracking app using GPS and phone numbers, because you can do Google and they literally have them all on GitHub. But it is very hard to change the mindsets of people regarding to their personal freedom and privacy matters, collectivisms, and their idea of nations being together, people being together. That is the thing that we want to emphasize. The most important thing about apps and tracking apps and privatization is how people see in those apps. Chinese people in the majority do understand their circumstance and listen to the government. Vietnamese follows as well. A lot of Asian countries follow that suit. European follows their government because they don't want to die. Now, what is America's choice? I want to leave that open question to you all, because after all, this is computer and society. The subject combines technology and real. Finally, this is the end of our presentation. I hope that after our presentation, you will realize how vulnerable we are, in fighting against unknown enemies. And whether or not you value your personal information, it should be remembered that we all share the same house. We are neighbors of each other, and in times of crisis, we should help each other. But the question still remains: how do we help each other? And how much should we value ourselves over the benefits of the others? That question will always remain a tough. Thank you. Life.